"Don't hurt me," whispered the Apache woman to the lone rancher who saved her from the river. The land was rugged, wild, and full of challenges, but it was also beautiful in a way that made a man feel alive. Every morning, he would rise with the sun, feed his animals, and check the fences that stretched across the property. Life was simple, sometimes lonely, but he liked it that way. He had learned to rely on himself, to understand the rhythms of the land, and to find comfort in routine. That morning was like any other. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of wet soil from the river nearby. Birds chirped in the distant trees, and the sound of water moving over rocks was steady and soothing. James had finished milking the cows and was walking along the riverbank, checking for any signs of trouble. Suddenly, he heard a faint cry. It was soft, almost swallowed by the wind, but it was there, a sound that made him stop in his tracks. He listened carefully, trying to figure out where it came from. The cry was weak and urgent, the kind that made a man's heart tighten with concern. Following the sound, James moved closer to the river, stepping carefully over loose stones and thick grass. Then he saw her, a young Apache woman struggling in the water, her arms flailing, her long hair plastered to her face. The current was stronger than it seemed, and she was caught in it, unable to free herself. Without thinking, James ran into the shallow part of the river. The water was cold and it rushed against his legs, but he pushed forward. Fear and adrenaline mixed inside him as he reached her. "Hold on," he shouted, extending his hand. She looked at him with wide, terrified eyes, and for a moment James feared she might pull away. Then slowly she grasped his hand. "Don't hurt me," she whispered, her voice trembling. The words were barely audible, but they carried a weight of fear and distrust that James could feel deep in his chest. He shook his head gently, trying to show her he meant no harm. "I won't hurt you," he said. "I'm just trying to help." Step by step, he guided her toward the riverbank. The current fought against them, pulling at their legs, making each movement difficult. But James held firm, and finally they reached solid ground. The woman collapsed on the grass, coughing and shivering, her chest rising and falling rapidly. James knelt beside her, offering a clean handkerchief he always carried. "You're safe now," he said softly. "Just rest for a moment." She didn't move at first, only staring at him with cautious eyes. He could see the cuts on her arms, the scratches along her legs, and the bruises forming where the river had battered her. Her clothes were soaked and clung to her body, and the cold had turned her skin pale. James felt a pang of worry. She was in bad shape, and alone, she would not have survived long. Carefully, he helped her stand and led her to a dry spot near some trees. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded slowly, leaning on him for support. Her movements were hesitant, but she trusted him enough to follow. Every step she took was careful, and every glance toward him was filled with a mixture of fear and curiosity. When they reached a small clearing, James set down his supplies, some blankets, dry clothes, and water. He poured her a little water from his flask. She drank slowly, her hands trembling. "Thank you," she murmured, almost too softly to hear. James smiled gently, though he knew the journey to trust would be long. He noticed her eyes scanning the surroundings, alert and cautious. She had clearly lived with danger, and even now she could not fully relax. James understood. He had heard stories of conflicts and hardships, and he knew that fear could stay with a person long after the immediate danger passed. He decided not to press her for information, not to rush her, and not to force her into conversation. Instead, he gave her space, tending to her minor injuries with the supplies he carried. He cleaned her cuts, applied bandages, and carefully removed stones and debris from her clothes. Every move was slow and deliberate, meant to reassure her that he was there to help, not to harm. The sun rose higher, casting a warm glow over the clearing, and for a moment the tension between them eased. As she began to recover, she finally spoke her name, Ahioka. James repeated it softly, careful to pronounce it correctly. "Ahioka," he said, "you're safe here. You don't have to be afraid." She looked at him, unsure whether to believe him. Her eyes, dark and expressive, reflected a life of struggle and survival, a life that had made trust a rare and precious thing. They sat together quietly, sharing the silence of the river and the gentle rustling of the leaves. Words were not necessary. Their connection was formed through actions, through care, and through the simple act of being present for each other. James found himself thinking about how fragile life could be and how quickly it could change. One moment, a person could be walking along a familiar path. The next, they could be fighting for their life in a river they thought they could cross safely. Ahioka eventually spoke more, describing in broken sentences how she had been traveling alone after her family was displaced. She had been trying to reach a safe camp when the river swept her away. Her story was fragmented, but James understood enough. He offered quiet words of reassurance, never interrupting, never judging. It was clear that she had suffered greatly, and the least he could do was provide safety and kindness. As the afternoon turned into evening, James built a small fire to dry their clothes and warm their bodies. He offered Ahioka a dry blanket and encouraged her to rest. She accepted, curling up on the ground with a wary glance at him. James settled nearby, keeping watch, knowing that the river could still be dangerous and that she needed protection. That night, under a sky filled with stars, they shared the quiet companionship of survival. Neither spoke much, but their presence was comforting. Ahioka's breathing grew steadier, and James felt a sense of relief. The day had been filled with fear, courage, and unexpected connection. He realized that sometimes life brought people together in ways that could not be predicted or planned. By the time the moon rose high in the sky, Ahioka had drifted into a light sleep. James remained awake, thinking about the fragile trust he had begun to earn and the responsibility he now carried. He knew their journey was only beginning, and that the path ahead would be filled with challenges, both from the outside world and from the lingering shadows of fear and mistrust. But for that night, at least, they were safe. And in the quiet of the Arizona wilderness, a bond had begun to form, one built on courage, compassion, and the simple act of saving a life when it mattered most. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over James Harper's ranch, painting the rugged landscape in shades of gold and amber. James had been awake for hours, tending to the animals and preparing breakfast, but his thoughts kept returning to Ahioka. The young Apache woman had slept peacefully through the night, but James knew that her rest was fragile. Fear and mistrust were not easily washed away, and he wanted to ensure she felt safe without overwhelming her. By the time he brought a simple breakfast to the clearing, Ahioka was already awake, sitting quietly on a dry patch of grass, her eyes focused on the flowing river. She accepted the food without speaking much, eating slowly, and James noticed how alert she remained. Every sound, every movement seemed to catch her attention. He realized that her world had been shaped by constant vigilance, by the need to survive in uncertain times. James sat down beside her, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her. "You don't have to talk if you're not ready," he said softly. Ahioka looked at him briefly, then returned her gaze to the river. She was cautious, but there was a hint of curiosity in her eyes. Over the next few days, James followed the same routine. He provided food, water, and warmth, and he gave her space. Slowly, she began to respond to his quiet kindness. At first, their interactions were limited to gestures and small exchanges. James would bring her water and she would nod in acknowledgement. He offered clean clothes and blankets, and she accepted them without fear. She had learned that actions often spoke louder than words, and James' careful, steady behavior showed her that he could be trusted. Each small gesture was a building block in the fragile bridge between them. As the days passed, Ahioka began to speak more. Her voice was soft, hesitant, and sometimes she struggled to find the right words in English. James listened patiently, never interrupting, never forcing her to explain more than she wanted. She shared fragments of her story, how her family had been displaced by conflict, how she had traveled alone to find safety, and how the river had nearly taken her life. James learned that she had experienced loss and fear that few could understand, yet she faced each day with quiet courage. James, in turn, began to share pieces of his own life. He told her about the ranch, about the animals he cared for, and about the solitude of living alone in the Arizona territory. He spoke of his early years, learning to work the land, and of the challenges he had faced in building a life for himself. While Ahioka's world had been shaped by survival, James' world had been shaped by patience, resilience, and the quiet rhythm of nature. Though their experiences were different, both had endured hardships that required strength and determination. One afternoon, as they sat by the river, Ahioka finally asked a question that surprised James. "Do all people here help strangers?" Her English was broken but clear enough. James smiled gently. "Not always," he said, "but some do. Some believe in helping when it's needed, without expecting anything in return." Ahioka nodded slowly, absorbing the words. It was a small moment, but it marked a turning point. She was beginning to believe that she could trust him, that not everyone brought harm. Despite this progress, tension lingered in the air. Ahioka was still wary of outsiders, and James was aware of the delicate balance he had to maintain. He had heard stories of settlers who feared the Apache, and he knew that harboring her could draw unwanted attention. Yet he felt a responsibility to protect her, to ensure that she could recover fully before facing the dangers of the outside world. He could see in her eyes that she understood this risk, but she also sensed the safety he offered. To strengthen her confidence, James encouraged her to explore the ranch slowly, always staying close but allowing her to move freely. Ahioka observed the animals, watched the birds in the trees, and learned about the plants and herbs that grew near the river. Each day she became more comfortable with her surroundings, and James saw her tension ease, if only a little. He admired her resilience and the quiet strength that allowed her to adapt to a new environment, even after everything she had endured. One morning, as they walked along a narrow path near the river, Ahioka stopped suddenly. I saw shadows," she whispered, pointing toward the distant hills. James looked carefully, scanning the horizon. "Probably just the trees and rocks," he said, though he knew that her perception of danger was heightened by her experiences. He didn't dismiss her fear. Instead, he nodded and took her hand gently. "If anything comes, we will face it together," he said. Ahioka's grip tightened slightly, a silent acknowledgement that she trusted him enough to believe his words. Over the next few days, their connection deepened in subtle ways. Ahioka began to share small details about her life before the river. She spoke of her family, of the traditions they followed, and of the songs her mother used to sing. James listened with quiet fascination, marveling at the richness of her culture and the strength of her spirit. In return, he shared simple lessons about ranch life, how to care for the animals, how to recognize edible plants, and how to predict changes in the weather. These lessons became moments of bonding, moments where trust grew alongside knowledge. However, James also knew that time was limited. Word of an Apache woman near the river was likely spreading, and tensions in nearby settlements could turn dangerous. He had to prepare Ahioka for the reality that their safe bubble could not last forever. He approached the subject cautiously, emphasizing that she needed to be aware of her surroundings while still assuring her that she had allies in him. Ahioka listened, her eyes reflecting a mixture of worry and determination. She understood that survival required not only courage, but also careful planning and awareness. One evening, as the sky turned orange and purple with the setting sun, Ahioka finally expressed something that had been buried deep inside her. I am afraid," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. James nodded, understanding completely. "It's okay to be afraid," he said softly. "Fear doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. And it's natural to be afraid after what you've been through." She looked at him, her eyes shining with a mix of gratitude and relief. For the first time, she felt that her fear could be shared, that she didn't have to carry it alone. Days turned into a week, and Ahioka's trust in James grew steadily. She began to smile more, to laugh softly at small jokes, and to speak with less hesitation. James, in turn, felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in years. Caring for Ahioka, protecting her, and witnessing her gradual return to strength reminded him of the profound impact a single act of kindness could have. Their bond was unspoken yet unmistakable, built on respect, patience, and shared survival. Yet even in this growing trust, Ahioka never forgot the dangers that surrounded her. She remained cautious, always watching the river, the hills, and the paths leading away from the ranch. James respected her vigilance, knowing that it was part of her survival instinct. He never forced her to relax completely, understanding that her journey toward feeling safe would take time. Patience, he realized, was as important as any other skill in building trust. By the end of the second week, Ahioka was walking along the riverbank with more confidence. She no longer flinched at every sound, and she began to explore areas of the ranch she had avoided before. James observed her from a distance, proud of the progress she had made. He knew that this recovery was not just physical but emotional. She had survived the river, but now she was learning to survive in a world that could be unpredictable and frightening, guided by the steady presence of someone she had come to trust. In these quiet days, the foundation of their relationship was solidifying. It was not a relationship of convenience or obligation, but one of mutual respect and shared humanity. Ahioka had learned that not all people were threats, and James had learned the depth of resilience that one human could carry. Their connection was subtle but powerful, a reminder that even in a harsh, wild land, kindness and trust could flourish. And though challenges still loomed on the horizon, both James and Ahioka were ready to face them together. Each day of trust and understanding strengthened the bond between them, preparing them for the uncertainties that lay ahead. In the quiet of the Arizona territory, by the flowing river, a fragile yet unbreakable trust had begun to take root, setting the stage for the journey that was far from over. Days turned into weeks, and life on James Harper's ranch settled into a quiet rhythm. The river flowed steadily, the animals grazed calmly, and the sun painted the sky in warm colors each morning. Yet beneath this calm, a tension was beginning to grow. Word of a young Apache woman seen near the river had begun to spread through nearby settlements. People whispered rumors, and a few neighbors eyed James' property with suspicion. Not everyone understood why he had brought her in, and fear often made people act harshly or without thinking. James noticed the subtle changes. Some of the townsfolk avoided him, and a few looked at the ranch with wary eyes. Even the mail carrier seemed nervous, glancing at the woods and river before hurrying away. James tried to ignore it, focusing instead on caring for Ahioka, who had grown stronger and more confident over the past few weeks. She was learning the rhythm of the ranch, the sounds of the animals, and the quiet patterns of the river. But even as she adapted, she could sense the whispers and glances from a distance. She had been cautious all her life, and danger was a language she understood well. One afternoon, while James was repairing a fence along the riverbank, Ahioka approached him. "People talking," she said quietly, her voice carrying a hint of worry. James looked up and nodded. "Yes," he admitted. "Some of them are worried about you being here. They don't understand yet that you're safe, that I'm keeping you safe." Ahioka's dark eyes reflected a mixture of fear and understanding. She knew that trust in strangers could be fragile, and that even good intentions could be met with suspicion or hostility. James realized that he needed to prepare her for the reality outside the safety of his ranch. "You need to be careful if anyone comes near," he said gently. "Not everyone will mean harm, but some might not understand. You can stay here and I'll protect you, but we must be aware." Ahioka nodded, gripping a small bundle of herbs she had collected earlier. She had begun to carry small items with her, a habit of caution that reflected her past experiences. As the day passed, the tension grew. A few men from a nearby settlement arrived, claiming they were looking for stray livestock. Their eyes lingered on Ahioka, and James could see the doubt and fear flicker across their faces. He greeted them politely but firmly, explaining that all his animals were accounted for. The men glanced at Ahioka again, their whispers barely audible, and then left without causing trouble. Still, James knew this was only the beginning. Word would continue to spread, and not everyone would be as cautious as these men. Ahioka watched the visitors leave, her hands clenched tightly in front of her. "They might come back," she said softly. James nodded. "It's possible," he admitted, "but we'll be ready. You're stronger than you realize, and together we can handle it." Her eyes met his, and for a moment the fear in her expression softened into determination. She had survived dangers before, and she was learning that survival sometimes required trust as well as vigilance. Over the next few days, James took steps to ensure their safety. He reinforced the cabin, cleared lines of sight along the river, and prepared a small stock of supplies in case they needed to move quickly. Ahioka helped, learning how to gather water, collect firewood, and maintain a watchful eye on the surroundings. Each task became a lesson in survival, and each lesson strengthened their bond. The ranch, once a place of quiet routine, had transformed into a space where caution, awareness, and trust existed side by side. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Ahioka spoke quietly. "I do not want to leave," she admitted. James placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I know," he said gently, "and I want you to stay safe here as long as you need, but the world outside is complicated. You'll have to face it eventually." Ahioka nodded, understanding that survival meant making difficult choices, balancing safety with freedom. The true test of their trust came suddenly, as it often did in the unpredictable Arizona territory. A violent storm rolled in from the west, dark clouds blotting out the sun and sending gusts of wind through the trees. Rain fell in sheets, turning the river into a raging torrent. Lightning lit the sky, and thunder echoed through the hills. James and Ahioka worked quickly, securing the animals in their shelter, and ensuring that the cabin was safe from the rising water. The storm was fierce, but James' knowledge of the land and Ahioka's instincts allowed them to stay calm and organized. As the night wore on, the storm worsened, and a large branch broke from a nearby tree, crashing near the cabin. Ahioka froze, fear gripping her once again. James took her hand firmly. "We're okay," he said. "We're together and we know what to do. You're not alone." His voice was steady, a source of reassurance in the chaos. Slowly, Ahioka's breathing steadied, and she began to help move supplies away from the water, following James' instructions without hesitation. The storm raged for hours, testing their endurance and resilience. Together, they managed to keep the cabin intact and the animals safe. Ahioka's skills and instincts complemented James' experience, and the two of them worked seamlessly as a team. By the time the storm passed, the river had swollen and the ground was muddy and slippery, but they had survived. Exhausted but relieved, they sat by the fire, drying their clothes and sharing quiet words of comfort. "This storm," Ahioka said softly, "it like life. Sudden, dangerous. We survived together." James nodded, impressed by her insight. "Yes," he said, "and the important part is that we don't face it alone. We watch out for each other." She smiled faintly, the first true smile in days, a small light in the aftermath of fear. The next morning, the river had calmed, but the storm had left its mark. Trees were down, the banks were flooded, and signs of the storm were everywhere. James and Ahioka worked together to repair fences and clear debris. In the process, they discovered a group of travelers stranded by the flood, seeking safety. James offered them shelter, and Ahioka watched closely, assessing their intentions. She had learned to read people quickly, and her careful observation ensured that no one posed a threat. Over the following days, James and Ahioka continued to strengthen their defenses and routines. They took turns keeping watch, learned how to move quietly along the river, and practiced communicating silently through gestures. Their bond deepened, built not only on trust but on shared survival and mutual respect. They had faced fear together and had come through stronger, more confident in their abilities and their connection. Yet, even as they grew stronger, the threat of human danger lingered. James knew that their isolated life could only protect them for so long. Ahioka, aware of the outside world, understood that not all dangers came from nature. People could be unpredictable, driven by fear, rumors, or misunderstanding. The lessons of survival they had learned together were preparing them for challenges that were yet to come, tests of courage, patience, and trust that would shape the rest of their journey. In the quiet moments, when the river flowed gently and the animals grazed peacefully, James reflected on the unexpected twists that had brought Ahioka into his life. He had rescued her from the river, but in return, she had taught him lessons about resilience, trust, and the strength of the human spirit. Their story was no longer just about survival. It was about understanding, empathy, and the quiet power of connection in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. By the end of Part 3, James and Ahioka had faced external threats and natural dangers together, deepening their bond and preparing them for the bigger challenges that lay ahead. Their trust had grown stronger, but the outside world remained unpredictable, reminding them that courage and awareness were always necessary companions. The days following the storm were calm, almost peaceful, but a quiet tension lingered over James Harper's ranch. Nature had tested them, and they had survived together, but both James and Ahioka knew that life was not only shaped by storms and rivers. There were still lessons to be learned, and challenges that could not be predicted. The time had come for both of them to face not just the physical dangers of the land, but the emotional truths that had been quietly growing in the space between them. Ahioka had grown stronger, both in body and in spirit. She moved confidently around the ranch, helping James with chores, tending the animals and observing the patterns of the river. Her cautiousness had not vanished, but it had transformed into awareness, a quiet understanding that danger could be managed with care and vigilance. James watched her closely, proud of her resilience and the way she had adapted so quickly to life in the open land. He knew that she had faced unimaginable hardships, and her courage inspired him in ways he had not expected. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Ahioka approached James with a thoughtful expression. "James, I think I understand now," she said slowly, choosing her words with care. James looked up, curious. "Understand what?" he asked gently. Ahioka paused, her eyes reflecting both fear and hope. "The kindness that is real," she whispered. "Not everyone wants to harm. Some want to help." Her words were simple, but they carried a depth of meaning that touched James deeply. He nodded, understanding the weight of her realization. "It's true," he said softly. "Kindness exists even when the world seems harsh. And it grows stronger when we choose to trust and help each other." Ahioka smiled faintly, a rare, genuine smile that seemed to light up her face. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace that had been absent for most of her life. She had learned to survive alone, to fight and endure, but now she was discovering that survival could include trust, friendship, and compassion. As the days passed, James and Ahioka began to explore not only the land around the ranch, but also the depths of their own understanding of each other. They shared stories of their pasts, each revelation strengthening the connection between them. Ahioka spoke of her family, the traditions they followed, and the songs and stories her mother had taught her. She spoke of times of joy, of moments when she felt truly safe and loved, and of the losses that had shaped her world. James listened quietly, never interrupting, letting her speak freely and trusting her to share what she felt ready to reveal. James, in turn, shared his own life story. He spoke of his early years on the ranch, of the solitude that had sometimes been comforting and sometimes painfully lonely. He told her of his struggles, of the mistakes he had made, and of the lessons he had learned. Through these stories, Ahioka began to see that James was not just a protector, but a human being who had also faced hardship, isolation, and challenges. Their experiences were different, yet there was a shared understanding of resilience, courage, and endurance. One afternoon, as they walked along the river, Ahioka paused and looked at James seriously. I feel safe with you," she said quietly. James felt a warmth spread through him at her words. "I'm glad," he replied, "and you should feel safe. You deserve safety, and I will do everything I can to ensure it." She nodded, but her eyes reflected a lingering thought. "I must still go back," she admitted. "My people, my family, they need me." James understood immediately. He had known this day would come, even as he hoped it might never arrive. "I know," he said gently, "and I will help you, but you have to promise me one thing." Ahioka looked at him, curiosity and concern mingling in her eyes. "What?" she asked. "Promise me that you will be careful," James said. "Your strength and courage have brought you this far, but the world can be dangerous. Don't rush. Take your time and remember what you've learned here." She nodded solemnly, understanding the wisdom in his words. In the following days, they prepared for her journey. James taught Ahioka practical skills for travel, how to find safe paths, recognize signs of changing weather, and move quietly through the wilderness. They practiced together, walking along trails, crossing shallow streams, and observing the landscape. Each exercise strengthened her confidence and reminded her that she was capable of facing challenges with the knowledge she had gained. At the same time, it reinforced the bond between them, built on shared experience and mutual respect. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the ranch, Ahioka spoke of her fears. Afraid, what if I cannot find them?" she asked. James placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You will," he said softly. "You've survived so much already. You know the land, you know yourself, and you have the strength to keep moving forward. Trust your instincts and trust that they are waiting for you too." Her eyes shone with a mixture of gratitude and determination, and for the first time, she felt truly ready to face the next step of her journey. The day of departure arrived quietly. James and Ahioka packed their supplies carefully, ensuring that she had enough food, water, and clothing for the journey. The river flowed gently beside them, a reminder of the storm they had endured together. As they prepared to leave the ranch, a sense of both sadness and hope filled the air. They had grown close, not only as companions but as friends who had learned from each other and supported one another through danger and uncertainty. Before she left, Ahioka turned to James, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Thank you for everything," she whispered. James smiled, trying to hide the ache in his heart. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You've shown me courage, resilience, and what it means to trust. I am proud of you, and I know you will find your family safely." She nodded, holding his hand briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had formed. As Ahioka walked toward the distant hills, James watched her figure grow smaller with each step. He felt a mixture of sadness and pride, knowing that she was ready to face the world beyond his ranch. She had grown stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own abilities. The lessons she had learned, the skills, the trust, the courage, would guide her forward, even in the face of uncertainty. After she disappeared from view, James remained by the river for a long time, reflecting on the journey they had shared. He thought about the moments of fear, the storms they had endured, and the quiet evenings by the fire. He realized that life had a way of bringing people together in unexpected ways, and that even brief encounters could leave lasting impressions. The connection he had shared with Ahioka was one of those rare, meaningful experiences that would stay with him forever. As the sun set and the sky turned shades of deep orange and purple, James returned to his cabin, feeling a sense of closure and hope. Ahioka's journey was just beginning, but she carried with her the lessons, strength, and courage that they had cultivated together. He knew that she would face challenges, but he also knew that she had the resilience to overcome them. Their bond, forged through trust, courage, and compassion, would remain a quiet presence in both of their lives, a reminder of the power of human connection and the strength found in kindness. By the end of this part, both James and Ahioka had undergone profound growth. Ahioka had discovered that she could trust again, that kindness could be real, and that her courage could guide her through uncertainty. James had learned the depth of resilience that one human could carry, and he had seen firsthand the transformative power of empathy, patience, and trust. Together, they had faced dangers, overcome fear, and created a bond that neither time nor distance could erase. And though the future remained uncertain, both understood that the lessons of trust, courage, and understanding would guide them through whatever came next. In the quiet of the Arizona territory, amidst rivers and hills and the endless sky, two lives had intersected briefly but meaningfully, leaving a legacy of hope, strength, and humanity that would endure far beyond the boundaries of the ranch. The morning sun rose slowly over the Arizona hills, casting long shadows across James Harper's ranch. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth and grass, and the river flowed quietly, reflecting the golden light. Today was different. Today, Ahioka would leave the safety of James' ranch and continue her journey toward her people. The calm of the morning was tinged with a mixture of hope and sadness. Both knew that this farewell was inevitable, but neither had truly prepared for the depth of the emotions it would bring. Ahioka had packed her belongings carefully, ensuring that she had enough food, water, and supplies for the long journey ahead. Each item had been chosen with care, a reflection of her cautious and thoughtful nature. James watched her in silence, noticing the subtle confidence in her movements. She had grown stronger, wiser, and more self-assured over the past weeks, shaped by experiences that had tested her courage and resilience. Yet beneath her composed exterior, James could sense a flicker of doubt and fear. Leaving a safe place, leaving someone she trusted, was never easy. James approached her, carrying a small bundle of supplies he had prepared. "Here," he said softly, handing it to her. "Take this with you, it should help along the way." Ahioka took it carefully, her hand steady despite the weight of the moment. She looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting gratitude, respect, and a quiet sadness. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. James shook his head gently. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You've shown more courage than I could have imagined. I'm proud of you." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts and emotions. Ahioka had learned much during her time at the ranch: trust, survival skills, and the quiet power of companionship. James had learned as well the strength of human resilience, the transformative nature of kindness, and the way courage could bloom even in the most unexpected places. Their bond had grown silently but firmly, shaped by shared challenges, mutual respect, and quiet moments of understanding. Finally, Ahioka broke the silence. I will try to find them," she said, her voice firm but reflective. James nodded. "I know you will," he replied. "Remember what you've learned here. Trust your instincts, stay aware, and be patient. Your people are waiting for you, and you have the strength to reach them safely." Ahioka smiled faintly, the first true smile of the morning, and for a moment the weight of uncertainty lifted slightly from her shoulders. They began the journey toward the distant hills together, walking slowly along the familiar paths near the ranch. The landscape was quiet, except for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant sound of the river. Ahioka moved with confidence, though she occasionally glanced at James for reassurance. Each step was a reminder of how far she had come, not only in distance but in personal growth. She was no longer the frightened young woman who had struggled in the river. She was stronger, more self-aware, and ready to face the challenges ahead. As they walked, James offered gentle advice. If you encounter strangers, observe first. Not everyone will be kind, but most people respect courage and honesty. Speak clearly and act with confidence. And remember, the land itself can guide you. Watch the river, the sun, the stars. They will help you find your way. Ahioka listened carefully, absorbing every word. These were lessons that could save her life, and she knew their importance. The journey was slow, each step measured, but their pace allowed for conversation and reflection. Ahioka spoke of her hopes and fears, the longing to be reunited with her family, and the desire to honor the traditions that had been passed down through generations. James listened, sharing small stories of his own life, tales of perseverance, and the lessons he had learned from the land and the animals he cared for. Their words flowed like the river beside them, quiet, steady, and meaningful. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher, casting shadows that shifted across the hills. Finally, they reached a point where the path forked, leading into the dense wilderness beyond the river. James knew this was the moment he would have to let her go. He stopped, turning to Ahioka with a steady gaze. "This is where our paths part," he said softly. "From here, you follow your instincts, your courage, and your heart. You know the land, you know yourself, and you have the strength to reach your people." Ahioka looked at him, a mixture of sadness, gratitude, and determination in her eyes. I will not forget you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. James smiled gently, a warmth in his expression. "And I will not forget you," he replied. "Our time together has taught me much about courage, trust, and kindness. Carry those lessons with you, and you will always be strong." For a long moment, neither spoke, and the quiet of the wilderness surrounded them. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of earth and river. Birds called to each other in the distance, and the soft murmur of the water flowed continuously beside them. In that moment, the bond they had formed felt almost tangible, a quiet, enduring connection that would remain long after their paths diverged. Ahioka took a deep breath, steadying herself. I must go now," she said, her voice firm. James nodded, stepping back to give her space. She began to walk along the path that led into the forest, her movements confident, her heart carrying the strength they had nurtured together. James watched her go, his eyes following her figure until it disappeared among the trees and hills. As he returned to his ranch, James felt a mixture of emptiness and pride. The house and fields were the same as they had always been, yet everything had changed. Ahioka had left a mark on his life that could never be erased. He reflected on the journey they had shared, from the river rescue to the quiet evenings by the fire, through the storm and the challenges of survival. Each moment had been a lesson, a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the power of trust and kindness. In the days that followed, life on the ranch returned to its familiar rhythm. The animals grazed, the river flowed, and James tended his land. Yet there was a quiet space in his heart where Ahioka's presence lingered. He often thought of her, wondering how she was faring on her journey, whether she had found her people, and how her life had changed since leaving the safety of the ranch. Though distance separated them, the lessons they had shared and the bond they had formed remained a lasting presence in both of their lives. Months later, James received word from a neighboring settlement that a young Apache woman had been seen returning to her community safely. The news brought him a quiet relief and a deep sense of satisfaction. He had known she possessed strength and courage, but hearing confirmation of her safe return reinforced the importance of the trust, patience, and guidance they had shared. It was a reminder that even brief moments of kindness and connection could have a profound impact on someone's life. In quiet moments by the river, James often reflected on their journey together. He remembered the fear in Ahioka's eyes the first day he rescued her, the cautious steps she took to trust him, and the strength she displayed during the storm and other challenges. He remembered the laughter, the stories shared, and the moments of silent understanding. Those memories became a source of comfort and inspiration, a testament to the enduring power of human connection and the courage found in empathy and patience. Ahioka, too, carried the lessons of the ranch with her. She taught them to her family, shared them with her community, and lived by the principles of trust, courage, and kindness that James had helped her nurture. She spoke of the lone rancher who had saved her, of the quiet strength he had shown, and of the bond that had transformed a moment of fear into a lasting connection. Her journey had not only reunited her with her people, but also allowed her to carry forward the knowledge and confidence she had gained. And so, the story of James and Ahioka became a quiet legend in the Arizona Territory, not a tale of romance or drama, but a story of courage, trust, and human connection. Two lives had intersected briefly yet meaningfully, leaving lasting impressions on both. Their experience reminded those who heard it that even in a world of uncertainty and danger, kindness, patience, and courage could create bonds that endure, guiding individuals through the challenges of life with strength and hope. By the end of their journey, both James and Ahioka had grown immeasurably. Ahioka had learned to trust, to rely on her instincts, and to embrace her own strength. James had learned the profound impact of empathy, the quiet power of kindness, and the way human connections could change lives in unexpected ways. Their paths had diverged, but the lessons, memories, and courage they shared would remain with them forever. And so life continued, James on his ranch, tending the animals and the land, and Ahioka among her people, carrying the wisdom and strength she had gained. Yet in the quiet of the river, in the gentle rustling of leaves, and in the memory of shared courage, the bond they had formed endured. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of trust, and the lasting beauty of human kindness, proving that even brief encounters could change the course of a life forever.